Good morning, Storytime friends. This is Mrs. Lawson. We have another baseball book today. This one is called Shoeless Joe and Black Betsy. It's by Phil Bildner and illustrated by C.F. Payne. Shoeless Joe and Black Betsy, a Simon & Schuster book for young readers. Shoeless Joe Jackson played an entire baseball game in his stocking feet. That's why they called him Shoeless Joe. Some say he was the greatest baseball player ever. Even the mighty Babe Ruth copied his swing. But what most people don't know is just how Shoeless Joe became such a great hitter. They say before Shoeless Joe started playing in the minors, he fell into a terrible hitting slump. Worst slump of his life. No matter what he tried, Shoeless Joe simply could not hit a baseball. He changed the way he stood at home plate. Didn't work. Switched from batting lefty to batting righty. Didn't work. Even tried wearing glasses. Still didn't work. Shoeless Joe began to grow more and more concerned. How could he possibly play baseball if he could no longer hit? Then Shoeless Joe had an idea. He went to see his friend, old Charlie Ferguson. Old Charlie was the finest batsmith in all of South Carolina, and in all the South for that matter. If it had to do with a baseball bat, old Charlie was your man. "Charlie," Shoeless Joe said, "I have an awful problem. I can't hit a baseball anymore, and I'm supposed to start playing in the minors. I need your help." Old Charlie raised his bushy eyebrow. "What do you want me to do about it, Shoeless Joe? I reckon I haven't played baseball in 40 years. "I need you to make me a bat," Shoeless Joe replied. "But not just any bat. I need you to make me the greatest bat there ever was. If you do, I just know I'll break out of this awful slump." Old Charlie looked at him. "You're an odd character, Shoeless Joe, but I reckon there ain't no job old Charlie can't handle. You come back in a few days, and I'll have what you need." A few days later, Shoeless Joe returned to old Charlie's workshop, and old Charlie handed Shoeless Joe the most beautiful baseball bat he had ever seen. "That's the bat," Shoeless Joe exclaimed. "She'll definitely be able to hit a baseball. I think I'm going to call her Betsy, after Betsy Ross. Pitchers are going to honor and respect this bat the way they respect the flag Betsy Ross created." So off Shoeless Joe went, but he couldn't break out of his slump. A few days later, he was back at old Charlie's workshop with Betsy in his hand. "Charlie, I'm still in a slump. What kind of wood is Betsy?" Shoeless Joe asked. "Oak," old Charlie replied. "Strongest wood there is." Shoeless Joe wagged his finger. "I need you to make Betsy out of hickory." Old Charlie raised his bushy right eyebrow. "Hickory?" Shoeless Joe smiled and nodded. "My last name is Jackson, just like the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. They called him Old Hickory. Any Jackson who swings a baseball bat must use one that's made out of hickory. And Betsy needs to be made out of hickory from the north side of a hickory tree. That's the strongest." Old Charlie looked at Joe and said, "You are an odd character, Shoeless Joe, but I reckon there ain't no job that old Charlie can't handle. You come back in a few days, and I will have what you want." A few days later, Shoeless Joe returned to old Charlie's workshop, and old Charlie handed Shoeless Joe the most beautiful bat he had ever seen. "That's the bat," Shoeless Joe exclaimed. "She'll definitely be able to hit a baseball." So off Shoeless Joe went, but he still couldn't break out of his slump. A few days later, he was back at old Charlie's workshop with Betsy in hand. "Charlie, I'm still in a slump. Pitchers aren't even afraid of her. Why?" "I reckon I don't recall much about pitchers," old Charlie replied. "I only know bats." Shoeless Joe wagged his finger. "I need for you to make Betsy big and tough." Old Charlie raised his bushy right eyebrow. "Mean and big and tough?" Shoeless Joe smiled and nodded. I need pitchers to be frightened of Betsy. I want 'em quaking in their spikes. Rub her down with tobacco juice, make her dark and scary looking, and make her big, real big. Betsy must weigh 48 ounces, 1 ounce for each state in America." Once again, old Charlie looked at Joe and said, "You're an odd character, Shoeless Joe. But I reckon there ain't no job that old Charlie can't handle. You come back in a few days, and I'll have what you need. But I'm telling you, Joe, sure as the sky is blue and the grass is green, I reckon there ain't much else I can do." The day before he was to start playing in the minors, Shoeless Joe returned to old Charlie's workshop. And the moment Shoeless Joe stepped through the door, old Charlie raised his bushy right eyebrow and spoke these words. "You're an odd character, Shoeless Joe. I reckon I've told you that each time you've come in to see me. My job is done. The rest is up to you." Then old Charlie gave Shoeless Joe the biggest and most beautiful black baseball bat he had ever seen. "That's the bat," Shoeless Joe exclaimed. "That's Black Betsy." So off Shoeless Joe went to the minor leagues. Playing in Greenville, South Carolina. That first year in the minors, he had a great year. Swinging Black Betsy, Shoeless Joe had 120 hits in only 87 games. At the end of the season, Shoeless Joe got called up to play for Philadelphia in the major leagues. But things didn't go so well for Shoeless Joe. He could manage only 3 hits in the major leagues, so they sent him back down to the minors. Shoeless Joe was dejected, so he and Black Betsy went back to see old Charlie. "Charlie, I don't know what to do," Shoeless Joe said, bowing his head low. "Black Betsy and I hit 346 over in Greenville, but when I got called up to the majors, we couldn't hit a lick." Old Charlie took one look at Black Betsy and raised his right bushy eyebrow. "Shoeless Joe, you are a mighty fine baseball player, and I reckon you got yourself the finest baseball bat in the land, but sure as the sky is blue and the grass is green, I reckon you don't know a thing about taking care of Black Betsy. Don't you know Black Betsy needs warmth and love? She needs to sleep in your bed each and every night." "Thank you, Charlie," Shoeless Joe said. "I'll do that." Every single night, Black Betsy slept right beside Shoeless Joe. Playing in Savannah that second season in the minor, he had even greater season. Swinging Black Betsy, Shoeless Joe had 161 hits in only 118 games. At the end of the season, Shoeless Joe got called up to play for Philadelphia again in the big leagues. But things didn't go so well for Shoeless Joe. Once again, he could only manage 3 hits in the major leagues, so they sent him back down to the minors. Shoeless Joe was even more dejected, so he and Black Betsy went back to see old Charlie. "Charlie, I don't know what to do," Shoeless Joe hung his head low. "Black Betsy and I hit a 358 down in Savannah, but when we got called up to the big leagues, we couldn't hit a lick. I even did what you told me to do." Old Charlie took one look at Black Betsy and raised his bushy right eyebrow. "Shoeless Joe, you are a mighty fine baseball player, and I reckon you got yourself the finest baseball bat in the land. But sure as the sky is blue and the grass is green, I reckon you don't know a thing about taking care of Black Betsy. Don't you know Black Betsy needs more than just a warm bed? She needs sweet oil massage every single night. I reckon she takes an awful bruising from all them baseballs." "Thank you, Charlie," Shoeless Joe said. "I'll do that." Every single night, Shoeless Joe massaged Black Betsy with sweet oil. And every single night, Black Betsy slept right beside Shoeless Joe. Playing in New Orleans that third year in the minors, he had an even greater season. Swinging Black Betsy, Shoeless Joe had 165 hits in only 136 games. At the end of the season, Shoeless Joe got called up to play for Cleveland in the major leagues. again. But before going to Cleveland, Shoeless Joe and Black Betsy went to see Old Charlie. Old Charlie, Black Betsy and I hit .354 down in New Orleans, and we've been called back up to the big leagues. I've been treating Black Betsy really good, but I'm worried things won't work out again. Old Charlie took one look at Black Betsy and raised his bushy right eyebrow. Shoeless Joe, you are a mighty fine baseball player, and I reckon you got yourself the finest bat in the land. I can see you're learning how to take care of Black Betsy. Well, Charlie ran his fingertips over Black Betsy's wood. When you get up north to Cleveland, you make sure you wrap her in a cotton cloth every night. The South is the land of cotton, Shoeless Joe, and cotton will make Black Betsy feel right at home in Cleveland. Thank you, Charlie, Shoeless Joe said. I'll do that. Shoeless Joe followed all of Old Charlie's instructions, and everything went perfectly. Swinging Black Betsy, Shoeless Joe had 29 hits and only 20 games. At the end of the season, Cleveland asked Shoeless Joe to come back to the major leagues again the next year. Shoeless Joe took Black Betsy down south with him for the winter because, as he used to say, bats don't like to freeze no more than me. And he took care of Black Betsy like no other bat had ever been cared for in the history of baseball. He slept beside her every single night. He sweet oil massaged her every single night. And he wrapped her in cotton cloth every single night. In the springtime, Shoeless Joe went to play baseball in Cleveland. In his first game using Black Betsy, Shoeless Joe hit his longest home run ever. He had a great season. Swinging Black Betsy, Shoeless Joe had 233 hits in only 147 games. They batted .408, and to this day, no rookie has ever had a finer year than Shoeless Joe. And of course, Black Betsy. Afterward, Joseph Jefferson Jackson was born in Pickens County, South Carolina on July 16, 1888. He grew up in a small town of Brandon Mill just outside of Greenville. Growing up poor and the oldest of 6 boys and 2 girls, Joe went to work in a textile mill when he was only 6 years old. He never learned to read or write. When he was 13, Joe began playing baseball. He was taught by an ex-Confederate soldier from the Civil War, a soldier himself who had learned how to play baseball in a northern prisoner of war camp, taught by the Union officers who held him captive. Joe started out as a pitcher, but he threw the ball so hard he broke the catcher's arm, so he began playing in the outfield. He earned the nickname Shoeless Joe in 1908, while in Greenville. Joe bought himself a new pair of spikes, but the new shoes gave him terrible blisters when he played baseball. When he arrived at the ballpark the next day, he could hardly walk. He wanted to sit the game out, but his team didn't have enough players, so Joe took off his spikes and played part of the game in his stocking feet. During the course of the game, Joe hit a triple, and as he was sliding into third base, a fan in the crowd shouted, "You shoeless son of a gun!" and the nickname was born. Shoeless Joe was also extremely particular about his bats. They were all originally made by his friend, Charlie Ferguson, in South Carolina, carved from the wood of the north side of a hickory tree. And because he liked his bats to be black, Joe would rub all of his bats with tobacco juice in order to turn them that color. Joe took great care of his bats. He would rub them with sweet oil and wrap them in cotton cloths. At season's end, he would take all of his bats home with him to South Carolina. He believed the bats didn't like the cold winter weather. He also believed that each bat only held a certain amount of hits. Whenever he went into a batting slump, Joe would change his bat. His favorite bat was the legendary Black Betsy, an enormous 36-inch, 48-ounce piece of wood. While Joe was picky about his bat, and he did insist it be 48 ounces, it was not because of the number of states in the Union. In fact, when Joe first began playing in the minor leagues, there were only 46 states. In 1908, Joe signed his first professional baseball contract and went to play minor league baseball for the Greenville Springers, earning $75 a month. and he led the league in hitting that year, batting .346. Later that same season, he went to make his major league debut with the Philadelphia Athletics. Joe played in the minors again during 1909 and 1910 seasons. He appeared in the major leagues for a brief period at the end of both seasons. The Athletics traded Shoeless Joe to Cleveland, and in 1911, his first full season in the major leagues, Joe batted .408, the highest batting average ever recorded by a rookie. In 1915, Cleveland traded Shoeless Joe to the Chicago White Sox, and within 3 years of the trade, Shoeless Joe Jackson led the White Sox to the World Series title. Then, in 1919, Joe was involved in the Black Sox scandal, the plot to intentionally lose the World Series. The previous year, the Chicago players had nicknamed themselves the Black Sox because the team's owner, Charles A. Kaminsky, was too cheap to have the players' uniforms laundered. Joe was allegedly offered $20,000 to help throw the series, but little evidence exists that he actually participated in the fix. In fact, Joe played an incredible World Series. He batted .375 and had 12 hits, a record for the most hits ever by a player in a single World Series. He hit a home run, drove in 6 runs, and did not make an error during the entire series. After the World Series, Joe went to see Charles Kaminsky in order to set the record straight, but the White Sox owner reportedly refused even to let Shoeless Joe into the office, not wanting to hear about any players fixing baseball games. The next year, in Cook County, Illinois, the grand jury investigated the scandal. Many of the alleged player confessions were mysteriously stolen, and all the players involved were acquitted of criminal wrongdoing. Nevertheless, the new commissioner of baseball, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, an iron-fisted former federal judge, decided to ban the 8 White Sox players involved in the scandal. Joe ended his career with a lifetime batting average of .356. Only Ty Cobb and Rogers Hornsby compiled higher lifetime batting averages. Over the course of 13 seasons, Joe led the league in tripled 3 times and struck out a total of only 148 times. Banished from the game he loved, Shoeless Joe opened a successful dry cleaning business in Savannah, Georgia. In the summer, he'd play baseball for any team willing to let him. In 1929, Shoeless Joe moved his business to Greenville, near his old hometown. A few years later, when Greenville needed someone to run their minor league baseball team, the city petitioned Judge Landis to allow Joe to be their player manager. Judge Landis refused to grant the permission. In 1951, the city of Cleveland elected Shoeless Joe to be a charter member of the Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame. Later that same year, on December 5th, Shoeless Joe died of a heart attack. In the 50 years since his passing, numerous efforts have been made to clear Shoeless Joe's name and have him reinstated into baseball. In 1998, the South Carolina State Legislature passed a resolution asking Baseball Commissioner Bud Siegel to lift the lifetime banishment of Shoeless Joe Jackson. And then they have a list of all of his stats. So, interesting ending to talk about the beginnings of one of America's baseball legends. That completes our stories of all of our baseball books. I still hope that we get a chance to see a little bit played. Love the sport just because it reminds me of kickball. And if you know the rules for kickball, you know the rules for baseball and softball. Have a great day. Enjoy your time outside.